So this is the last part of this video series about this creator PC. And this is perhaps my favorite one because we're talking about the best bang for buck and how you can configure this PC to your workflow. And the good part about PC building is that you can change all the parts, configure it to your needs and what you need it for. So in this video, we're going to be going through every single part of this PC and hopefully give you some of the tips depending on your workflow, what you are doing and how you can save money building these PC, and what are some of the alternatives if you don't like perhaps the color scheme or something like that. What are some of the alternatives you can go for? So without no further ado, let's jump right in. So we're going to start with the CPU. Inside there we have the Ryzen 5950X CPU. It's a 16-core absolute monster when it comes to creative CPUs because there's a lot of CPU power. Now I think for most of the people, the best bang for buck CPU is actually the Ryzen 5900X, which is a 12-core CPU, and it's a little bit cheaper, about $250 cheaper than this what we have over here. And you're wondering, what are some of the performance losses then? In fact, not all programs can utilize 16-core CPUs, and in some of the cases, this alternative 5900X is actually better performer. If you want to see how good this is in video performance or other benchmarks, I'm gonna recommend and link up there some of the videos we've done on the channel with the 5900X. But basically, in a nutshell, the 5900X is only a few percent slower than the 5950X, but gives you pretty much the same performance in most of the cases, which I think is a very, very impressive thing. And for most people probably makes the most sense if you want to save a little bit of money. What if the 5900X is still a little bit more expensive and you want to go with something further below? I recommend you start with the 5600X. This is a 6-core CPU and it's quite affordable now, especially now after the Intel's 12th gen has been launched. This is going to get a bit of a price discount, which makes it very affordable for this system. Now, if you want to know how that CPU performs in the video or photo editing tasks, then I'm going to link another video that I've done completely separate on my channel about that CPU, about that system. Then check it out on the channel. But basically, it's a very, very good performer CPU. Even if you're doing 4K editing, it's absolutely fantastic in doing that. It might be a little bit slower in some of the rendering speeds, or if you're editing on photos, the single core is slightly slower. It's still a very, very good CPU and can save you a lot of money because it costs less than half of the CPU we have inside there. Now you might be wondering, what about the 5800X, which is in between the 5900X and 5600X? And I'd say skip that one because there's not that big of a performance boost from the 5600X, and there's not that big of a gap between the price of 5900X and 5800X. So I recommend you go with the 5600X or 5900X. So the 5600X will be the budget one, 5900X the best bang for buck, kind of I think middle ground, which will make most of the people happy, and the 5950X the best for this platform. By the way, all of these CPUs are interchangeable, so if you want to upgrade from 5600X to 5900X or 5950X, then you can just change them up here and then upgrade later on in the future. But I want to mention that if you're doing a lot of rendering and video work, then maybe the high core CPUs are a little bit better for you, like the 5900X and 5950X. If you're doing photo editing, then perhaps the 5600X can be the best bang for buck for you because there isn't that big of a difference between 5600X and 5900X. Have a look at some of the benchmark videos. I'm going to link up there as well on my channel, where you can see there isn't that big of a difference. The difference is when you're exporting the photos or putting some of the photos together. When it does a lot of the CPU rendering or putting the videos, photos together, then the 5900X is better than the 5600X. But actually working on the photos and the active like workflow, for example, in Lightroom Classic, the active score isn't that different. Next off, let's talk about motherboards. Now inside there we are using the Asus ProArt X570 Creator Wi-Fi motherboard, and I think this is probably the best motherboard for creators who want just the best motherboard you can get. There are some gaming motherboards that have even more features, but a lot of them are really, really overpriced, and you might get only one M.2 slot more. But this one, I think, just features everything any creator would need. Whether you're audio, video, photo, any editor, this just has all of it inside there, and that's why we have gone with this one as well. I think this just has all the bells and whistles. Now, if you want to save a little bit on the motherboards, it's a little bit of a difficult situation to like actually give you some of the alternatives, because you really have to think or kind of predict what your business is going to be like in the few years, and what would you like to do, or the upgrade paths you want to go for in the upcoming years as well, because changing the motherboard inside your PC is probably the most faffiest thing you can do. It's the hardest bit to do, and it's not really recommended. So what I'd want you to think before deciding on the motherboard is, okay, think a little bit forwards. Where do you want to go? For example, if you are thinking about using a NAS or upgrading your storage workflow to a NAS a little bit later on, or you really need maybe some of the Thunderbolt 4 ports, then think about if you really need this motherboard. If you think, do you know what, I'm just gonna use some of the USB ports and I want the best CPU and graphics card for video editing, and I'm not really, bothered about any of the upgrade paths, then we can talk about now the alternatives. The other alternative is this. The B550 Creator motherboard, which is just a cheaper version of this ProArt version. Now, if you're thinking about no future upgrades and you don't really want to upgrade your storage like M.2, then this one is quite a good option, and you're saving around $100 or £100, something like that on it. It is a good contender, but at the same time, this X570 has so much more features in it that if you combine the value of these features with this B550 motherboard, then you see that the X570 has clearly better bang for buck kind of rating, because it's just got more stuff in it that if you wanted to add these over here, you'd actually end up paying more. But this might still be quite expensive for most of the people, because it still like sets you back about $274 or up to $300, which can be quite expensive for a motherboard. So what are some of the other cheaper alternatives? Now, I want to say that there is ASUS TUF Gaming X570 Pro motherboard that costs around £200 or dollars or something like that, and it's also X570 chipset, so you get quite a lot of the features, but it is missing some of the high-end creative features like 10 gigabit NAS, Thunderbolt 4 ports, a lot of fast USB-C or USB connectivity, and it might not have as many M.2 slots with the heatsinks and so forth. But if you just want something to get going, it might be a good option. And like the lowest of the lowest, let's say you just want to get started, you're very, beginner in the field, but you're really excited about doing some photo, video editing or graphics design, and you really want to learn and maybe, upgrade your PC later on in the future, then I do recommend the ASUS TUF Gaming B550 Plus motherboard, which only costs £119 and can still have all the same upgrade paths of the CPU, RAM, all the other bits, but it just doesn't have a lot of the connectivity of other bits like the networking, USB fast ports or M.2 storage ports. Just a few things for you to think about. All the options that I'm mentioning, I'm gonna leave in the description below. Next up is the Windows license, and this is where our sponsor of this video, WhoKeys.com, comes in. Now, if you look for a Windows license for your PC, because obviously you're using most likely Windows with your PC when building this, you realize that buying a Windows online can set you back around £100 to £150, dollars, euros, whatever currency you are in. But here's the good news. If you want to pay only a fraction of the price of that, then go in the description below, find the link of WhoKeys.com and use the code TN20, and the key is gonna set you back only about $15, which is like 1/10 of the price. So whoever's buying or building this PC or building another PC, go check out WhoKeys.com, because you're gonna save a lot of money when paying for your Windows license. Check them out in the links below. Now let's talk about RAM. We are using 64 gigabytes of Kingston Fury Renegade RGB memory, and this is running at 3600 megahertz at CL18 latency. Now, whatever RAM you are going for or whatever capacity you're thinking of going for, I always recommend you to go with 2 sticks of your required capacity, because then that will leave you an option to later on in the future upgrade to double of the capacity that you have currently. So if you want 64 gigabytes, don't go with 4 60 gigabytes of sticks, but go with 2 32 gigabytes of sticks, because then later on when you're, doing bigger projects, you can actually upgrade it to 128 gigabytes. So here's some of the alternatives if you want to save some money on the RAM and if you want some alternatives. Also, I'm gonna leave some of the similar specs and perhaps some competitor brands down in the description below as well, because check the deals on each of them. Sometimes one may offer a deal and you get it for the better price. But if you want this specific look, then go with exactly that model that I am using over here. But if you want to lose the RGB of the RAM sticks, you're actually gonna save a little bit of money because RGB doesn't add anything to your setup. So if you want to get rid of those, you actually save around $10 or $20 pounds, something like that. So I'm going to leave those in the description below with the same specs of the RAM as well. If you're willing to lose a little bit of a speed of the RAM to 3200 megahertz, then you can save an extra almost $100 on the RAM sticks, exactly the same RAM sticks, either RGB or without RGB. Now, how much of a performance difference will that give you actually? Less than 1%, you're not gonna notice it in most of the scenarios. Obviously, it will be better and more optimal to use 3600 megahertz RAM as we have over here, but you can go with 3200 megahertz and that will save you extra 100 pounds or something if you do need to save that money. And this is all with the 64 gigabytes of RAM. Now, the minimum I recommend any creator to go with is 32 gigabytes. Do not go for 16 gigabytes. I think it's way too little. A lot of the programs you use for your creative purposes will use a lot more than 16 gigabytes, so it will be a bottleneck of your system. 32 gigabytes can set you going and it's quite alright, but I think like the nice, comfortable sweet spot is 64 gigabytes because in my system, I am using 64 gigabytes and often when rendering or doing some multitasking, I can easily see over 32 gigabytes used, especially when using Adobe products. So if you are in a similar workflow, then I highly recommend you go with 64 gigabytes minimum and then leave the upgrade path for later. All the RAM deals I'm gonna leave in the description below, as well as some of the other brands next to it if you want to check out some of the deals in the description below. Let's talk about the CPU cooling now. And I think this is one of those parts that I think you shouldn't really change, because whenever we change this, it's really not worth it. There is a brown version of this exact same cooler, which is the Noctua NHD15. We have the Chromax Black, but there is like the normal without Chromax in there as well, with silver towers and brown fans, which saves you extra $10 or something like that. And if there's people who don't care what the PC looks like, it's a very good option, because no point of, spending extra £10 if you don't care what it looks like. But I think this is one of the best, I think this is the best air cooler you can get for your money, and this can run you for years and years to come. Whatever upgrade path you go, Intel or AMD, you can get like brackets for the new sockets from the manufacturer. So this is gonna be like awesome cooler. I don't think it's worth really going with anything less or anything above. If you go with anything less and you go with a lesser CPU, whenever you do an upgrade, you have to upgrade your cooler as well. But even if you go with a Ryzen 5 or 7, whichever one you go for, I think just go with this cooler, because then you'll never have to change this cooler. This is a solid cooler. It will keep whatever CPU cool. So I think honestly, this is like the best bang for buck. If you really think that you're not gonna like upgrade your CPU and your system for a lot of times and you want to go with Ryzen 5, then I'm gonna leave you some like $25 coolers down below if you want to go with them. But most cases, I think this is the cooler you don't want to change and a part that you want to keep cool. Even if you're running like the lower end CPUs, the cooler your CPUs, the better for your system, the cooler it will run, the quieter it will run. It's just the best. And now storage and SSDs. Okay, this is the bit where there is a lot of choice and I'm trying to make some like sense for you which one you should go for. First of all, I'm going to slot it down to different storage workflow options. So OS drive, project drives, cache drives, and so on, and archive drives. So first of all, the OS drive. Which OS drive should you go for? We over there are running the Cardia C440, and there is also a Z440 available, which is basically like the same drive, the same specs drive, just a little bit of a different design. So have a look at both of them. Whichever one is on a good deal, check them out in the description below. But I think this is one of the best drives you can go for in terms of price and performance. It's just very, very good all around there. And it's not too expensive. It's not going to give you some of the ridiculous specs that you don't need. It's awesome. I don't think there is really anything better for the OS drive unless you really are on a budget. Then I recommend the Western Digital SN550 drives, which are about half the speeds of this drive and less than half of the terabytes written specs of this, which shouldn't really matter for the OS drive. It will still be completely fine for you. Now the project drive. Our project drives SSDs in there are two Seagate Firecuda 530 2 terabyte drives. And these are like the best drives I think you can get for the creators, because they're extremely fast, like as fast as it can get. They have extremely high terabyte written spec. So if you're working with very high capacity files, like video files or render files or photo files, and a lot of like big capacity files go through your SSD, you don't have to worry about like your drive breaking because there's a very high terabyte written spec. They have also very good data recovery service with them, and they can go up to 4 terabytes in size. It's very hard to find 4 terabytes with those specs, and these Firecuda 530 drives have them, which are, it's just the best what you can get on the market for creators. I know they market it as gaming drive, but you know what, they're not really gaming drives. They should be marketed as creative drives, because to me they make much more sense to creatives than gamers. But what are some of the alternatives, let's say, if you do want to save some money, because those drives are, they're gonna set you back like quite a bit because they are the best. The first alternative I would give you is the OS drive that we have, the Cardia C440 or Z440, and you can just replace your project drives with those. Now the only downside with those is that these only go up to 2 terabytes in size. So if you need more than 2 terabytes, there isn't a drive available, and you might be only able to get like 4 terabytes in total with 2 of the extra M.2 slots on the motherboard. But very high terabytes written specs, like over 99% of the drive can be written every single day. If you want to know more about those drives and the like SSD configuration, check out this video. I'm gonna link it up there, where I'm gonna go more in detail about why these drives are awesome. But then let's say you want to save a little bit more on the project drive. What are some of the lower options? Then there is the T-Force Cardia Z340. So basically the same drive, but PCIe 3.0 speeds rather than 4.0 speeds, because all the drives so far we have talked about are PCIe 4.0. And that drive has up to 3.5 gigabytes per second read speeds. It's a little bit cheaper and still very high terabytes written spec. It's tiny bit cheaper, so you can save a little bit of money there. And if you want to save even more on your project drives, I recommend the Western Digital SN550 drives. Now those drives are very, very affordable, and you can get them up to 4 terabytes in size, but the read and write speeds are up to 2.4 gigabytes per second, which is still very high, and for like most people completely fine, but they only cost like fraction of the price compared to like what we have over here. But if you want the best, obviously this is the way to go. If you want to save some money, the SN550s are awesome drives. They are PCIe 3.0, and the terabyte written spec is 600 terabytes written, which means that you can fill about 33% of the drive every single day for the next 5 years, which is still quite okay for most people. So definitely worth checking that one out. Now, if you need more project drives for the system, and let's say you just need more capacity, then there's a lot of SATA 2.5-inch base in the back of the case, so you can go with SATA SSDs. So I recommend you check out the Western Digital, SanDisk or T-Force in the description below. I'm gonna leave some options over there if you want to go with SATA drives. In terms of the cache drive, I'd use exactly the same recommendations as on the project drive over there, depending on your workflow. And know this because not all workflows will have very high like capacity files going through the temporary files as well. But if you do, you might want to go with higher terabytes written spec or like a bit higher, you know, speed drives. But I think like SN550 for cache drives, for most people, it's going to be plenty of speed and terabyte written specs for you to use. And last of all, the archive drives for your storage workflow. Now, we are using the Kingston A400 SATA SSD over there, and one of the reasons is to keep this system very quiet and very fast. Now, you're getting like over 500 megabytes per second read and write speeds of that drive. Now, you can go with some of the other SSDs that I mentioned previously. It's completely fine as well. But if you do want to save a little bit of money on your storage and you're not so bothered about the quietness of it, here's some of the alternatives. First of all, go with hard drives. But here's an extra tip for you creators if you want to have a little bit of like best bang for buck and future upgrade ability for your hard drives. Whenever choosing hard drives for your system, use NAS rated hard drives for your PC. They are no different than normal hard drives, but they can be used in a NAS as well. So for example, in the future, when you are upgrading to a NAS, then you can just pull those drives from your system, maybe buy a few extra, and then boom, you have the NAS system already in there, and you don't have to cash out so much money on your NAS hard drives, because that is the most expensive cost when it comes to network attached storage. But what you can't really do is use normal hard drives in a NAS. So my first recommendation is, instead of going with the Kingston 2 terabyte SSD over there, you can go with Seagate Ironwolf 8 terabyte hard drive, which is a NAS rated, which you can use in a NAS later on. It is slightly slower read and write speeds, about up to 300 megabytes per second, but it is the same price as that SSD over there, but 4 times the capacity. You have 8 terabytes in size. It is a little bit louder, quite a bit louder than what we have over here, and it's gonna be most likely the most loudest thing in your system, but it is an option. Now, if you want to save even more, you can go with the Seagate Barracuda like compute hard drives, which are a little bit cheaper than the NAS rated hard drives. But I wouldn't use the compute hard drives in a NAS later on. Just a little tip, depending on your, what you want to do in the future, that's what you can go for. And then like the cheapest of the cheapest hard drives I would really go for are some of the Toshiba hard drives that I'm using in my system as well, actually. And they're very, very cheap. I think the best bang for buck when you just want cheap high-end storage, but obviously they're hard drives and they make noise and things like that. Now, when choosing the capacity of the hard drive, I recommend you making sure that you get the best bang for buck in terms of capacity and price for your hard drive. So check the model of the hard drive, and then start looking at the hard drive capacities from higher to the bigger capacity drives. And then you'll see that the best bang for buck area is somewhere in the middle. It's not the very smallest of the hard drives or the very big capacity hard drives. It's somewhere in the middle where you get the most terabytes for your dollar. Sometimes it's 6, sometimes it's 8, sometimes it's 12 terabytes. Just make sure, and depending on different times and deals, make sure you're doing that to save extra and to get best bang for buck for your money. Now, GPU, this is probably the most exciting bit for most of the people and probably the most disappointing bit of the build for most people as well. We are using the RTX 3090 over here. This is the Asus TUF Gaming 3090. Most people think, flipping heck, this is so expensive. It's cost like about $3,000 scalper prices. It's about double of the MSRP. I know this is one way of seeing it, but here's another way of seeing it, which actually helped me, and I think it will help you as well. Now, do you remember the Titan RTX graphics card, which also had 24 gigabytes of RAM, and the MSRP for that was about $2.5 grand. Yet, that card was from last generation, and it's so much slower or worse performer than this RTX 3090. So I think the RTX 3090 is an actual replacement for the Titan RTX graphics card. And if you see it that way, then you'll see that the RTX 3090, even at scalper prices at $3,000, isn't that bad of a value in terms of graphics card, because you're getting a lot of fast VRAM, you're getting super fast GPU that has a lot of power and a lot of compute power, and you're not paying that much more compared to the Titan RTX. And even if you compare the price to performance, the 3090 might look like the better bang for buck. So if you're looking at it that way and forget whatever Nvidia and people said about the MSRP, I personally think that they knew that this was never going to be the MSRP, and this was more likely going to be like the Titan RTX MSRP. Then it's not that bad of a GPU. This is the best of the best GPUs you can get for your creative PC. If you want to save a little bit, there are quite a bit of other options, and depending on your workflow, you can easily overspend on your GPU without getting any extra performance. So stay tuned. Now, the second lower option down, what I recommend you to go for is RTX 3080 or 3080 Ti. I think 3080s are harder to find than the 3080 Ti's. Any one of these you go for is completely fine. They can be quite a bit cheaper, or depending on your price or wherever you're gonna find them, they can be cheaper than the 3090, but they're gonna be like 90 to 95% of the performance there. Now, if your workflow can't utilize the 24 gigabytes of VRAM, then definitely 3080 or 3080 Ti is the best bang for buck in terms of high-end graphics card. But if you're doing over 6K or 8K editing, then the 3090 obviously is better for you. But let's take another step lower, which is the 3070, 3060 Ti or 3070 Ti kind of region over there. And these cards, I think, are the best for most of the people out there. I am personally using a RTX 3070 in my rig, and as much as I love the 3090, I need to use this card for most of my videos and other work and testing setups and things like that. But it does a great job in my even 6K editing workflow. Like, this camera is 6K and it's completely fine. So I think for most people doing 4K, 5K, 6K, up to 6K editing, the 3070, 3060 Ti are completely fine. What's the difference between 3060 Ti and 3070? The 3060 Ti is about 5% slower, but can be quite a bit lower in price. So both of these cards are gonna be completely fine. I've labeled them in the same bracket because the performance difference isn't that big, and the VRAM and everything, you're not going to see that big of a performance difference, but what you will see a difference is the price for most of the people, and that tier is the best graphics cards to get. I'm going to leave some of them in the description below if we can find them, in stock somewhere. And now comes the very difficult point for me to recommend. You're saying, yeah, but this is still very expensive for me. What is anything below that? Now, anything below that, I think, loses its value. I've done some research and looked online cards over and over again. Anything from the 20 series or maybe 1660, 1650, 1660 Ti, any RTX 2000 or 2000 Super series, I think you're gonna get so much more value out of the 3000 series cards of 3070, 3060 Ti or so on, because they don't produce the 2000 series cards anymore, and the 2000 series graphics cards, because of the GPU shortage, are so overpriced, which makes them for me very hard to recommend, because I'm looking at the price to value comparison and they're giving so much less performance than the 3000 series cards, yet they're only a fraction of the price lower than the 3000 series cards. For example, looking at some of the 2060 Super, for example, or 2070 Super, the card is only maybe 25% lower price than the RTX 3060 Ti, yet less than half of the performance. So as you can see, anything below that is very hard for me to recommend. And I really want you to think and maybe save a little bit more to get the 3060 Ti or 3060, because it does seem like a better value in terms of a graphics card compared to anything of the 2060 cards. Now, there can be exemptions and deals and things like that, and if you can find something very cheap, awesome, go for it, be happy. Everyone would love to get that, so I wish you luck finding one. But if you are a photographer, this is very important for all the photographers to understand. If you're a photographer and photography is your main workflow, and you're using the PC only for photography things, and let's say you're not doing a lot of other things, then having an expensive GPU will give you pretty much zero performance. Let's say from the lowest GPU to the highest GPU, you might get extra few percent of the performance at maximum, at the ideal situation, but most of the time the performance difference is a zero. I did some performance differences with the iGPU and the dedicated RTX 3090, and sometimes with the iGPU I got higher scores, which means that the difference is within the margin of error, and the better GPU will give you no difference. So if you're a photographer and using maybe Lightroom, Photoshop programs, just get any GPU you can find or you can afford, anything cheap, because that GPU will only run your monitors. It won't give you any extra performance in your workflow. it doesn't give you anything. So that's very important to understand. Now, power supply unit. We are using the Fractal Design Ion Plus 2 860 watt 80 plus platinum power supply. And I think this is a very good power supply because it has over 10-year warranty, which is what you want from a power supply. You don't want to go with a cheap power supply that has very little amount of years of warranty. Here's the tip for you. If you want a good power supply, make sure it's got 10 plus years warranty and you know it's a good power supply. It's got 80 plus platinum rated efficiency rating for the power consumption, which means that whatever system you run, you're gonna save in the years to come. That money you're gonna spend on electricity, it's gonna pay for itself using this power supply. And it's not that expensive compared to some of the other brands out there, like Corsair 80 plus, you know, Corsair RMX 850 or 1000 power supplies. It's not that more expensive going with this one. So it's very, very affordable, gives me good specs, and I think it's just a good competitor. Now I'm gonna leave another brand in the description below as well, because you might get a deal. There is Seasonic brand as well down there. If you wanna go with that one, it's up to you. But if you're using less than 3090s, you can go with 750 power supply, and that will save you a little bit more. But it's only when you go in with less than 3080. Like above 3070, I think you should go with 850 plus watt power supplies, just because the power consumption of those high-end graphics cards is much higher. Now, another way to save money over here, if you don't care about the looks, is the power supply extension cables. Now, these cables are like so nice, and if you can get them and if you like looking at your PC, these are fantastic cables. If you want to get them or design them yourself from Cable Mods, I'm going to leave the link in the description below. But in all fairness, they're not required. You don't need them. They give you zero performance. So if you want to save a little bit of money over there, you can just skip that step over there and just use the included power supply cables that are in your power supply case. And there you go. And last of all, looking at the case. How can you save the money on the case? Now, this case here, whether you go with RGB version or without the RGB version, the non-RGB version is obviously a little bit more affordable. So if you want to save a little bit of money over there and get completely black, for example, you can go with that one. But this case is the best air-cooled case in the world you can get. If your stuff inside your PC is air-cooled, which it is in our case, then I think this is a fantastic case. Now, it is a little bit of beefy and big, and if you don't mind that, this is an absolutely amazing case for you. It looks cool, I think. The things inside will perform very, very well, and it's very quiet as well. But at the same time, it is a premium that you're paying for this case, and it's not the cheapest case out there, because Fractal knows this is the best air-cooled case in the world. But if you want to save a little bit of money, I'm going to recommend you Corsair 5000D Airflow case, which has very good airflow as well, but is a little bit more affordable. It's still quite big, and there's different colors available, as well as RGB available, and good airflow available, but not as good hard drive SSD, I think, configuration available if you want to go with that one. But it is a good option. I've done a build on my channel before if you want to check that out. Also, if you want to go with a little bit of a smaller build, there is like the Corsair 4000D Airflow or Be Quiet Pure Base 500DX case, which are like mid-tower cases. They're a little bit smaller, but it might run a little bit hotter in there because they're smaller and all the components are all together inside. The larger cases, basically, the cooler they're going to run as well, because more air can flow, you know, through them and so on. Whichever case you choose for this build, make sure it has a good airflow, because having a good airflow will have not just cooler components, but longer longevity. What is it? Longevity. What's the word? When it lasts long. Longevity. Is that the word? Anyway, your components are gonna last longer when you have cool airflow, and the cooler your components run, the longer they last, basically. And that's it. I know this has been very, very long video, but I wanted to give you all that I can offer you to save money on this PC and get this PC configured to your workflow and get the best bang for your system. Now, I would love to hear from you. If you have any other tips for me or any other comments, I'm gonna meet you in the comment section below to hear any other best bang for buck tips from you. Likes if you enjoyed this video, subs if you'd like to see more, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.